It's a Tuesday morning, maybe you're running a few minutes late.
Oh, definitely running late.
Right, exactly. So you grab a bagel straight out of the toaster, it's perfectly warm, and you reach into the fridge for that familiar plastic tub of cream cheese. You swipe a knife through it, spread this thick, rich layer across the bread, and take a bite.
Sounds like a pretty solid morning, honestly.
It does, right? It's creamy, it's tangy, it's exactly what you expect. But I want you to pause right there for a second. Because what if I told you that the $4.98 tub of cream cheese you just bought isn't actually cream cheese at all?
Yeah, that's the kicker.
What if instead of rich dairy fat and, traditional cultures, you're essentially eating a carefully engineered suspension of tap water, industrial gums, and this chemical scaffolding designed in a laboratory just to trick your tongue?
It's a slightly unnerving thought to start the morning with. I mean, I'll give you that.
It really is.
Because we tend to trust our groceries instinctively, right?
Yeah.
You walk down the dairy aisle, you see a heritage brand, maybe a picture of a pastoral farm on the label, and you just assume the product inside matches the imagery.
You assume it's milk and cream.
Exactly. But the modern dairy aisle is full of incredibly sophisticated illusions.
And that is exactly what we're exposing in today's deep dive. We're going to look past the heritage branding, all the premium grocery store aesthetics, the deceptive labels, to understand the actual chemistry of what you're spreading on your breakfast.
Which is so needed right now.
Yeah, we're focusing specifically on exposing the fakes masquerading in the dairy aisle. We'll show you how that average tub is a chemical illusion, and ultimately we're revealing the real brands you can actually trust.
Because to understand how the food industry fakes this stuff, you first have to understand the genuine article.
Right.
You have to understand the biological baseline they're actually trying to mimic. And you really can't talk about the baseline of cream cheese without talking about the absolute biggest name in the game.
Yeah, when I say cream cheese, almost everyone listening immediately pictures the exact same brand.
The silver foil.
Yep, the silver foil, the blue oval. Philadelphia. It's practically synonymous with the product itself. But going through the research for this deep dive, the first massive illusion we need to shatter is that Philadelphia cream cheese wasn't even invented in Philadelphia.
Not even close. It's actually one of the most successful, longest-running pieces of purely geographical marketing in American history.
Which is wild.
I mean, the true origin story takes us back to 1872 up in Chester, New York.
Chester, New York. I mean, not exactly the city of brotherly love.
No, exactly. So there was a dairyman up there named William A. Lawrence. And at the time, Lawrence was already manufacturing a style of Neufchâtel cheese.
Right, which is a traditional kind of crumbly, soft French cheese, right?
Yeah, exactly. But Lawrence was, a bit of a tinkerer. He decided to experiment with the traditional recipe by adding just an excess amount of heavy cream to the milk before he started the fermentation process.
So he's essentially just supercharging the fat content of a standard Neufchâtel.
Precisely. And the result was something entirely new for the American market at the time. It was significantly richer, softer. It was this unripened fresh cheese that didn't have that crumbly texture of traditional Neufchâtel.
It was dense.
Yeah, dense and smooth. So he simply called it cream cheese.
Okay, so Lawrence is up in New York making this rich new cheese in the 1870s.
Yeah.
How does Pennsylvania even get involved?
It doesn't.
Wait, really?
Not biologically, not geographically, not at all. In 1880, a New York cheese distributor named Alva Reynolds partnered with Lawrence to help sell this new product.
Great.
And Reynolds was a savvy marketer. He knew that at that specific time in American history, the Philadelphia region was renowned across the country for producing incredibly high-quality, rich, luxurious dairy products.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it was seen as the absolute gold standard for dairy farming.
Wait, so then the most famous geographic association in the history of dairy is just a 19th century branding exercise?
That's all it was. Reynolds just slapped the name Philadelphia on this New York-made cheese because he knew consumers would instantly associate that word with premium quality.
Wow.
It was a complete gimmick. But it worked so flawlessly that, a century and a half later, we still instinctively associate the product with a city that had absolutely nothing to do with its creation.
It just shows you how deeply a label can anchor our expectations, But, okay, let's look past the Philadelphia label for a second. We really need to unpack what William Lawrence was actually making back in 1872.
The actual science of it.
Exactly, because we pulled from a ton of sources for this deep dive, right?
Right.
We've got investigative videos like Food Fraud Watch, Grocery Exposed, Food Facts Exposed. We looked at culinary taste tests from the kitchen. a food science journal study, industry insights, even a passionate Reddit thread of home bakers.
A very passionate thread.
So passionate. But looking at the actual science of real cream cheese across all these sources, it's surprisingly elegant. The real stuff only requires 4 ingredients.
Just 4? I mean, if you are making genuine, biologically authentic cream cheese, all you need is whole milk, cream, bacterial cultures, and salt.
That's the entire list.
That's it. The magic isn't in some massive list of texturizers or additives. The magic is entirely in the biological process of fermentation.
And I want to dig into that fermentation process because understanding how those 4 ingredients transform it's crucial to understanding why the modern fakes is so problematic.
Absolutely.
So in a normal glass of liquid milk, the proteins naturally have a negative surface charge, right?
Yes. Let's break down the chemistry of the curd here because it's genuinely fascinating. So the primary proteins in milk are called caseins.
Okay.
And these casein proteins group together to form these tiny microscopic spheres called micelles.
Right, cells.
You can think of a micelle sort of like a microscopic dandelion head, right? And they're floating all throughout the liquid surrounding the fat particles. Now, the crucial part is that the outside of these micelles, the surface amino acids, they carry a negative electrical charge.
And because they all have a negative charge, they naturally repel each other. Just like, 2 identical ends of a magnet.
Exactly. That continuous microscopic repulsion is what keeps the fat and protein evenly dispersed throughout the water in the milk.
It maintains the emulsion.
Yes, it's the only reason milk is a smooth, unified liquid and doesn't just, instantly separate into a layer of dense fat and a puddle of watery whey.
So to turn that smooth liquid into a solid, spreadable brick of cheese, you somehow have to stop them from repelling each other. You have to disrupt that negative charge.
Right.
And that is where the bacterial cultures enter the chat.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You take this pasteurized, homogenized mixture of milk and cream, and you introduce specific strains of lactic acid bacteria. This usually happens at a very specific, carefully controlled temperature, right around 22 degrees Celsius.
Which is what, 72 degrees Fahrenheit? Basically just a warm room temperature.
Yeah, correct. It's the ideal environment for these specific bacteria to thrive. So, as these bacteria start feeding on the lactose, which are the natural sugars in the milk, they produce a byproduct.
Lactic acid.
Exactly. And as more and more lactic acid is produced, the pH of the entire vat of milk begins to steadily drop. It becomes more acidic.
And here is where the mechanics get really interesting. Because as that pH drops, it physically alters those casein micelles. The amino acids on the surface of the proteins begin to lose their negative charge.
They do. It's less like a slow fade and more like flipping the polarity on a magnet.
Wow.
Suddenly, these protein structures, which were comfortably repelling each other and happily floating in the water, meaning they were hydrophilic or water-loving, they just lose that protective negative charge. They become neutral.
And when they become neutral, they suddenly become hydrophobic. They fear the water.
Exactly. They lose their affinity for the surrounding liquid, and because they're suddenly hydrophobic, they panic. To protect themselves from the water, they all start violently clumping together, trapping the rich cream fat inside their network as they bond.
And that mass coagulation is what forms the dense, rich, solid curds that make up the actual body of the cream cheese.
Yep, that's the cheese.
It's incredible that just a microscopic shift in pH can physically restructure a liquid into a solid. But the timing of this is incredibly precarious, isn't it? I mean, you can't just let the bacteria eat forever.
No, it's a very delicate biological art form. If you leave the bacteria in the vat too long, they'll keep producing lactic acid, the pH will continue to drop, and eventually those micelles will actually attain a positive charge.
Wait, they flip all the way to positive?
Yeah, and if that happens, they'll start repelling each other again, and your solid cheese will literally dissolve and revert back into a sloppy, acidic liquid.
So how do you stop it?
The manufacturer has to halt the fermentation at the exact right nanosecond. In food chemistry, this is known as the isoelectric point.
The isoelectric point. Okay, what does that mean practically?
It's the precise pH state, usually right around 4.6 for cream cheese, where the surface amino acids are perfectly balanced. Half are positively charged, half are negatively charged.
Meaning the overall net charge is exactly 0.
Right. This is the point of maximum coagulation and maximum structural density. So to freeze the cheese in this exact state, the manufacturer rapidly heats the mixture up to between 52 and 63 degrees Celsius.
Because that heat is just hot enough to kill off the lactic acid bacteria.
Yeah.
Right? So it stops the acid production entirely.
Exactly. It kills the bacteria, stops the pH drop, and permanently locks in that thick, creamy structural network.
It's a beautiful, completely natural process. I mean, the biological fermentation does all the structural heavy lifting. The milk fat provides the luxurious richness, the bacteria provide that signature tang, and hitting that precise isoelectric point locks in the dense texture.
It's food science at its best.
Right, so if making real cream cheese is this elegant biological process that relies entirely on high quality and frankly very expensive cream,
Yeah.
how did our modern grocery stores end up filled with cheap, perfectly uniform, squishy tubs of stuff that doesn't actually follow this process at all?
Well, that is the multi-million-dollar savings question for the food industry. If you want to understand how the dairy aisle became compromised, you have to understand the ultimate regulatory loophole.
Okay.
And it all comes down to something called the FDA Standard of Identity.
Right, because legally, a food corporation can't just throw white paste into a plastic tub and print the words cream cheese on it.
Right.
There are actual laws governing what that phrase means.
There are, and historically they've been quite strict. The FDA maintains a specific standard of identity for cream cheese. To legally use those two words on your packaging in the United States, the final product must contain a minimum of 33% milk fat by weight.
33%.
Okay. Yep. It also has a maximum moisture content, which is really just the industry's polite word for water capped at 55%. And the pH has to sit squarely between 4.4 and 4.9.
Just as a point of reference from the research, the Canadian standards are actually slightly different. Up there, the fat requirement is a bit lower at 30%, but they maintain that same strict 55% maximum moisture limit.
Right.
But the whole point of these rules is consumer protection, right?
Yeah.
To ensure that when you're paying for cream cheese, you're actually paying for fermented dairy fat, not just a tub of water.
Precisely. But, you know, the industrial food complex is exceptionally good at reading the fine print.
Oh, they always are.
Always. And decades ago, they found, or rather lobbied for, a trapdoor in those regulations. It's a single word that changes the entire legal classification of the product. And if you go to your fridge right now, you'll usually find this word printed in a much smaller font right next to the brand name on the tub.
And that word is spread.
Spread. That single noun unlocks an entirely different, exponentially more lenient regulatory universe. If a company labels their product as cream cheese spread rather than just cream cheese, that strict 33% minimum fat requirement plummets down to just 20%.
That is a massive drop. I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking about removing a third of the required dairy fat.
Oh, it gets worse.
Okay.
Simultaneously, the maximum allowable moisture is permitted to spike up to 60%.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit because the economics of water versus fat, they make sense on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Cream is obviously the most expensive ingredient in dairy manufacturing, and tap water is basically free.
Absolutely.
So if you're a massive conglomerate churning out millions of tubs a month, replacing 13% of your expensive cream with free water saves you absolute fortunes. But chemically, I don't buy that it's that simple.
What do you mean?
Well, if I take a block of real cream cheese in my kitchen, and I aggressively whisk tap water into it to try and increase the volume by 10 or 15%, I don't get a nice spreadable tub of cream cheese. I get a separated, runny, gross puddle. The physics just don't work. The fermented dairy fat is the literal structural foundation of the cheese. So if these companies are stripping out the fat and pumping the product full of water, how is it holding its shape on the grocery store shelf for 3 months without turning into soup?
That's the perfect question because you're absolutely right. Natural dairy chemistry cannot support that much water with that little fat. The emulsion would collapse.
Exactly.
And that is exactly what would happen if the food industry didn't rely on modern chemical engineering to fix the physical problem they created.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, to artificially support all that cheap water, the industry introduced a whole new class of ingredients to act as an invisible scaffolding.
You're talking about hydrocolloids, the gums.
Yes, the architecture of fake creaminess. This is where the ingredient lists on the back of the tub stop looking like a traditional farm recipe and start reading like a chemical inventory. When you turn over a typical tub of cream cheese spread, you are almost guaranteed to see a cocktail of the usual suspects. You'll see carrageenan, xanthan gum, gar gum, locust bean gum, which is sometimes listed as carabine gum, and modified food starch.
Let's break down the mechanics here. What exactly are these gums doing inside the tub?
At a molecular level, these hydrocolloids function as microscopic sponges. They have this massive, almost unnatural capacity to bind with water molecules. And when they trap that excess water, they create intense viscosity.
So they're artificially thickening the water.
Exactly. They produce a thick, dense, rich mouthfeel that your brain normally associates with the luxurious melt of dairy fat.
Even though the fat isn't there.
Right. They essentially force the water to physically act like fat. They give the watered-down product its spreadability, they hold its shape in the plastic tub, and they make it look visually correct to the consumer's eye.
And the manufacturers know exactly what they're doing. I mean, this isn't some accidental byproduct of a new recipe. One of the sources we pulled for this deep dive was a peer-reviewed study from the Journal of Food and Nutrition Research.
Yeah, that was a fascinating read.
The researchers in this study were actively experimenting with adding different hydrocolloids to fruited cream cheese spreads, specifically to see how it allowed them to manipulate the texture.
Yes, they were testing a 2% concentration of various gums, specifically pectin, gelatin, and carrageenan.
And the results of that study are incredibly telling about how these products are engineered. They found that when they used a specific combination of gelatin and carrageenan, which they labeled as the CSGC batch, it resulted in a massive spike in the structural integrity of the spread.
The exact metrics they recorded were wild. The hardness of the spread measured at 321.45 grams of force resistance, and the viscosity hit 189.33 centipoise.
Wait, let's contextualize that for a second. For those of us who don't run food rheology labs, what does a viscosity of 189 centipoise actually feel like in the human mouth?
Think of the exact physical resistance you feel when pulling a butter knife through room temperature Vaseline, or maybe like a very thick motor oil.
Ew, Vaseline.
Yeah, it's a dense, heavy, almost unnatural slickness. The researchers in the study actually noted that this specific gelatin-carrageenan combination resulted in the highest sensory scores from their testers for compactness.
Meaning it felt the most dense and solid.
Right. What this study definitively proves is that these specific, highly processed textures you feel when you eat a modern tub spread aren't a natural byproduct of cheese making. They are intentionally, mathematically engineered in a laboratory to hit precise structural metrics so they can hold as much water as possible.
And it's worth noting, the study also found that as this gum-heavy spread sat in cold storage for 60 days, sensory issues like graininess began to steadily increase.
It degrades over time.
Yeah, the chemical illusion starts to physically falter as the bonds weaken. But let's get to the really concerning part of all this. Because finding out you're being cheated out of some dairy fat to save a corporation money is annoying, but there are genuine health implications to eating this chemical scaffolding every morning. The investigative deep dive from Food Facts Exposed dug heavily into this.
It's a critical point to unpack. We aren't just talking about a culinary downgrade here. A rapidly growing body of independent medical and physiological research is beginning to link the heavy daily consumption of these industrial stabilizers, particularly carrageenan, to a host of serious gastrointestinal issues.
Let's explain what carrageenan actually is first, because it sounds natural. It's derived from red seaweed, right?
It is. It's extracted from edible red seaweeds. But the extraction and processing completely change its biological interaction with the human body.
Okay, how so?
Well, because carrageenan resembles natural dietary fiber, it passes through your upper digestive tract largely intact. Your digestive enzymes can't really break it down, but as it moves through the gut, studies have shown that it can cause physical abrasion and damage to the delicate epithelial lining of the intestines, actively degrading the protective intestinal mucus barrier.
Which is a massive problem, because that mucus barrier is exactly what prevents pathogens and undigested food particles from entering your bloodstream.
Exactly. When that barrier is compromised, your immune system recognizes the intact carrageenan molecules as foreign invaders. The immune system flags them, triggering macrophages to attack, which causes a localized inflammatory response.
So you're essentially scraping your gut lining with a compound your body flags as an enemy.
Right. And beyond just the physical damage to the gut wall, there is emerging endocrinology research pointing toward these specific stabilizers, impairing the body's ability to process blood sugar efficiently.
Wow, really?
Yes. The chronic low-grade inflammation they trigger can lead to cellular insulin resistance over time. Furthermore, increased dietary carrageenan intake has been clinically associated with a significantly higher risk of developing Crohn's disease.
That is terrifying.
It's also been shown to trigger severe relapses in patients who already suffer from inflammatory bowel disease. By eating these spreads, you are basically giving yourself a daily, concentrated dose of a known pro-inflammatory agent.
The physiological data is so serious that the National Organic Standards Board, the regulatory body that determines what can and cannot be labeled organic in the U.S., they actually voted to explicitly remove carrageenan from their list of approved ingredients for certified organic products.
They did.
They looked at the critical science and decided this compound has absolutely no place in an organic, health-conscious food system. But in the spirit of looking at all the sources objectively, the dairy industry vehemently disagrees with this assessment.
They certainly do. They have a very robust defense ready for whenever these hydrocolloids are questioned.
We look at industry insights from Lekker Kirker Food, which is a major multinational dairy manufacturer based in the Netherlands. They actually argue that these heavily stabilized dairy spreads are a healthier alternative to traditional full-fat cream cheese.
How do they justify that medically?
Well, their logic is entirely based on lipid profiles. They argued that by removing the natural milk fat and replacing it with plant-based oils, water, and stabilizers, they are significantly lowering the saturated fat content of the final product.
Oh.
Yeah, they claim their specific spread sits at just 10.6% saturated fat, which they're quick to point out meets various national dietary guidelines for heart-healthy eating. Plus, from a pure convenience standpoint, they argue that modern consumers demand a product they can easily spread onto a soft piece of sandwich bread the exact second it comes out of a cold refrigerator, which traditional block cheese can't do.
It's a very clever, highly manicured defense, but it highlights a massive foundational flaw in how we've historically viewed nutrition over the last 40 years.
The obsession with isolating single metrics?
Exactly. Yes, if you only look at a nutritional spreadsheet in a vacuum, the saturated fat metric is technically lower. But that reduction comes at an incredibly steep physiological cost.
Right.
You are trading natural, biologically compatible dairy fat, which humans have digested for thousands of years, for a highly processed matrix of extracted seaweed gums, chemical thickeners, and modified starches that your digestive system fundamentally struggles to process, and which actively promotes systemic inflammation.
Right. It's reducing one isolated risk factor, saturated fat, while blindly introducing several entirely new and arguably much worse risk factors directly into your gut microbiome.
It is the absolute definition of a false economy for your health.
Yeah.
You're saving a few grams of fat, but potentially destroying your intestinal mucus barrier in the process.
Okay, so armed with the actual mechanics of how they fake the texture and why eating this chemical scaffolding matters to our gut health, it's time to start naming names.
Time for the list.
Yeah, it's time to expose the bad list. The brands that are heavily guilty of selling you this watered-down illusion while pretending to be wholesome dairy. Let's start at the very bottom of the grocery store shelf with the budget offenders.
The most obvious starting point for the budget tier is Walmart's Great Value brand. This is a massive, massive volume seller across the country. It typically retails for around $1.56 for an 8-ounce tub.
Now, I have to admit, the investigators over at Food Fraud Watch actually said that the Great Value cream cheese spread is surprisingly pleasant to eat from a purely sensory perspective.
Interesting.
Yeah, they noted it's very dense, it feels rich on the tongue, and it has a decent tang to it.
But that perceived perfection is exactly what gives it away as a complete fraud.
How so?
Because traditional biological fermentation is a living process. It inherently produces slight variations in taste, texture, and density batch by batch. The Great Value spread is so uniformly dense and perfectly elastic because it doesn't rely on biological curation.
Ah, the gums.
Right. It relies heavily on a chemical cocktail of modified food starch, guar gum, and xanthan gum. It possesses an entirely artificial elasticity designed in a lab to perfectly mimic the sensory resistance of real dairy fat. When you pay $1.56 for that tub, you aren't getting a great deal on dairy. You are paying for heavily stabilized tap water.
Which brings us to the Amazon grocery brand cream cheese. It sits at that exact same budget price point, but the culinary execution is apparently terrible. The sources noted it has a distinct off flavor, almost tart, astringent, and slightly spoiled, even when you open a perfectly fresh tub.
And there's a very specific chemical reason for that flavor profile. Instead of just relying on gums to build the structure, the Amazon brand leans heavily on whey protein concentrate to try and replace the richness of the missing cream.
Let's explain whey protein in this context, because people usually associate whey with muscle-building shakes, not cream cheese.
Right. Whey is the liquid byproduct of the cheese-making process. When the casein curds coagulate and separate, the watery liquid left behind is the whey. Now, casein proteins form a beautiful structural net that holds fat. Whey proteins are globular, they don't form that same luxurious structure, and they severely lack the milk fat molecules that coat the tongue and provide a rich flavor.
So what happens when they use it?
When a manufacturer concentrates whey and pumps it into a spread to fake the density of a curd, it results in an astringent, sour, highly processed sensory experience. It lacks the smooth, buttery finish of cream and leaves that tart, chemical aftertaste that ruins your breakfast.
Oh, that sounds awful. And we can't forget the massive, sprawling network of generic store brands. We're talking about Kroger's house brand, Essential Everyday, and dozens of various regional grocery chains. I think a lot of consumers just assume these are name brand products secretly packaged in cheaper plastic to save money on marketing.
That's a very common misconception. The reality is these store brands are often produced by massive unseen industrial conglomerates, companies like the Dairy Farmers of America, who act as co-packers for multiple retailers.
And their entire business model is optimized purely for manufacturing speed and cost reduction.
Precisely. At that industrial scale, they completely abandon traditional slow vat fermentation. It takes too much time and requires too much expensive oversight. Instead, they rely heavily on industrial methods that use those whey and milk protein concentrates we just talked about to rapidly build a structural base, rather than letting the cream curdle naturally over time.
Wow.
It's fast, it's cheap, and it produces a perfectly uniform, albeit completely characterless, product.
But prioritizing speed and volume over traditional biological processes has real-world consequences, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. When you rush dairy processing at a massive scale, the safety margins shrink. Just look at Aldi's house brand, Happy Farms.
Oh, right.
In 2024, they were swept up in a massive FDA recall tied to potential salmonella contamination. And it was a recall that affected several of these co-packed, industrially produced store brands simultaneously because they all originate from the same hyper-optimized supply chains.
So the takeaway is you get exactly what you pay for at the budget level. But here is where the deep dive gets really interesting. And honestly, where reading the sources made me feel the most manipulated as a consumer. Let's talk about the premium illusion.
Oh, this is the worst part.
It is.
Yeah.
Because the natural assumption is that if you choose to shop at a high-end, health-focused grocer, you are automatically escaping these industrial shortcuts.
That is the exact assumption the marketing departments rely on, but the actual ingredient labels tell a very different, highly cynical story. Let's look at Whole Foods Market and their in-house 365 brand.
To do it.
Consumers deliberately choose to shop at Whole Foods, and they willingly pay a premium, usually around $2.59 for this specific product, because they are buying into the implied standard of a clean, carefully curated food environment.
Right. You assume the baseline standard is just inherently higher because of the store's reputation.
But if you actually flip the 365 cream cheese tub over and read the fine print, you will see it relies on the exact same chemical toolkit as Walmart's Great Value. Yes, it's loaded with guar gum, locust bean gum, and carob bean gum. You are paying a premium price for the implied context of the grocery store's aesthetic, not for a higher, cleaner ingredient standard.
And the culinary results completely reflect that chemical reality. The culinary team over at The Kitchen did a comprehensive blind taste test of all these brands, and they found the Whole Foods 365 brand to be incredibly bland. It lacked any real dairy richness, and they noted it had a bizarre, slippery texture in the mouth.
Which is almost certainly the result of the interaction of those three different gums trying to mimic fat.
Yep, and Trader Joe's is guilty of the exact same deception.
Trader Joe's has an incredibly loyal customer base that defends the brand almost like it's a religion. But their cream cheese is heavily stabilized. The Kitchen noted their spread had a strange, almost chewy texture that is completely unnatural for fermented dairy.
Chewy cream cheese. Gross. And Target's Good & Gather brand plays the same game, charging a premium aesthetic markup for an Aldi-tier formula that's absolutely loaded with moisture-trapping hydrocolloids. But as manipulative as the premium illusion is, it pales in comparison to what we found in the next category, We have to talk about the luxury scams.
These are the brands that charge absolute top dollar, leverage sophisticated old world European branding and use it to mask truly terrible, highly processed ingredients.
Let's start with Alouette. I had to read the Alouette label 3 times before I caught this. They present themselves as this elegant, luxury artisanal brand, heavily focused on spiced and flavored varieties like garlic and herb.
Right, the little fancy tubs.
Yeah. They charge a massive premium, around $5.46 for a tiny 6.5-ounce tub. But if you look closely at the packaging, they don't even use the words cream cheese.
They don't, and that is a very intentional legal evasion. They call their product soft spreadable cheese.
By dropping the word cream entirely, they exempt themselves from even the incredibly low, watered-down bar of the spread category we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Legally, a standard cheese spread still must contain a minimum of 51% natural cheese by weight. But the nebulous category of soft spreadable cheese has almost no strict minimum requirements.
Wow.
When you buy Alouette, you are essentially buying a tub of dairy-flavored margarine. It's an emulsion of water, gums, and fat, laced with heavy, aggressive spices designed purely to distract your palate from the fact that the underlying texture is a matrix of industrial stabilizers.
And to make matters worse, the ingredient deck lists sorbic acid, which brings us right to the massive French conglomerate President. They are a $30 billion global dairy titan. You see the President logo and you instantly think of artisanal, rustic French countryside cheese.
Right, the heritage aesthetic again.
But the investigators at Food Fraud Watch point out an amazing detail. President doesn't actually sell a true cream cheese in the US market.
No, retailers frequently mislabel their product on the shelf tags as cream cheese, but the actual product is called Rondelet spreadable cheese. It's another evasion. And just like Alouette, President relies on sorbic acid to keep it shelf stable.
Let's explain why sorbic acid is such a red flag for a so-called luxury brand.
Sorbic acid is a cheap artificial preservative. It is widely considered a massive red flag in premium dairy manufacturing. Real, properly fermented cream cheese, if it is handled cleanly and correctly packaged, does not need an artificial preservative to sit safely on a grocery store shelf.
Because of the lactic acid, right?
Exactly. The natural acidity from the lactic acid bacteria acts as its own preservative. In fact, many massive conventional brands phased out sorbic acid over a decade ago due to consumer pushback. The fact that a supposed luxury European brand still relies on it to stabilize their product is baffling, and it speaks to the underlying quality of their manufacturing process.
You'd think the artificial preservatives in President are the bottom of the barrel for European imports, but the conglomerate Arla actually takes it a step further. Yeah. Arla is a huge Danish-Swedish dairy company. Now, to be fair, their main Arla line in the US is actually relatively clean, but they export a specific sub-brand called Puck, primarily to markets in the Middle East and Africa. And apparently they don't hold those consumers to the same nutritional standard.
It is a glaring, highly cynical double standard. If you look at the ingredient list for the Puck brand, you'll see they substitute actual dairy fat with palm oil.
Palm oil in a cheese product.
Yes. Palm oil is an incredibly cheap, highly saturated fat. Not only is it linked to negative cardiovascular outcomes, but the mass cultivation of palm oil is a leading driver of global deforestation and the destruction of native biodiversity in places like Indonesia and Malaysia.
It's terrible for the environment.
And furthermore, Puck uses E339 to hold this palm oil emulsion together.
E339. What is the mechanism there?
E339 refers to specific emulsifier salts, mainly sodium phosphates. Their job is to forcefully bind water and oil together chemically. But in the human gut, these inorganic phosphates are highly problematic. Excessive inorganic phosphate binds aggressively to calcium ions in your digestive tract.
Okay, what does that do?
It forms an insoluble compound called calcium phosphate, which your body cannot absorb and simply excretes. So, consuming products heavy in E339 actively disrupts calcium absorption. It literally leaches the available calcium from your diet.
So you are consuming a luxury-priced product that is actively terrible for your internal gut ecosystem and terrible for the global ecosystem simultaneously.
It's the worst of both worlds, packaged beautifully.
And finally, rounding out the bad list, we have a product that isn't technically dairy at all, but plays the exact same deceptive texturizing game. Violife vegan cream cheese. Now, I want to be clear, I have nothing against plant-based eating or vegan alternatives.
Right, of course.
But I absolutely hate being visually tricked by packaging. If you look at the Violife tub, it's designed with the words cream cheese printed in large, prominent, bold letters.
It's a psychological trick. Your brain is scanning the shelf rapidly, and it instantly reads cream chews as cream cheese. You literally have to stop, pick up the tub, and squint to see the word alternative, printed in tiny monochrome font underneath. It is highly intentional visual deception.
And the nutritional profile of this alternative is arguably worse than the dairy fakes we've been ripping apart. People naturally assume that because something is plant-based, it's inherently healthier. But despite being vegan, Violife actually contains more saturated fat per serving than regular full-fat dairy cream cheese.
Yes, the lipid profile is shocking. It packs 8 grams of saturated fat per serving compared to the roughly 6 grams you'd find in real dairy. Just 2 spoonfuls of this vegan alternative provide nearly half of your daily recommended limit for saturated fat, usually derived from heavy coconut oils.
It also has a noticeably higher sodium count, absolutely zero protein, and the culinary sources noted it has a very strange, distinct, floral and fruity aftertaste.
A floral aftertaste.
A floral aftertaste does not belong anywhere near a toasted everything bagel.
No, it does not.
Okay, so we've covered the budget fakes, the premium illusions, and the luxury scams. But there's one brand that sits squarely in the middle of this entire controversy. A brand so massive and iconic that, as we discussed at the very beginning, its name is literally synonymous with the product itself. Yet it operates one of the most massive double standards in the entire modern grocery store. We need to talk about the Philadelphia paradox.
What's fascinating about this paradox is how a single brand entity can manufacture both the absolute gold standard of a commercial product and one of its absolute worst, most chemically dependent iterations simultaneously, relying entirely on the consumer's blind historic trust in their logo to sell both.
Let's start with the bad side of the paradox. The Philadelphia tubs, the whipped varieties, and the reduced fat options. Millions of people buy these products blindly every single week just because they see that classic blue oval logo.
But if you actually stop and read the ingredient deck on the back of those tub spreads, you will find a veritable cocktail of those industrial stabilizers we've been discussing. The Philadelphia tubs are absolutely riddled with carrageenan, guar gum, xanthan gum, and whey protein concentrate.
Yep.
They are employing the exact same water and gum texturizing strategy as the cheapest budget brands on the market, using chemical scaffolding to mimic the density of cream.
And they are charging an absolute premium for it.
Yeah.
In some regional markets, a simple tub of Philadelphia spread can cost over $7. You're paying luxury heritage prices for water held together by seaweed extract and industrial gums. And this massive corporate reliance on the fake stuff really accelerated recently, didn't it? The research pointed to a specific turning point.
It did. The sources highlight the 2021 COVID-19 supply chain crisis as a major catalyst.
Oh, interesting.
During that period, Kraft Heinz, the massive parent company that owns Philadelphia, was actually shipping 35% more cream cheese product to stores than the previous year, yet they were still experiencing massive, highly publicized national shortages.
I remember that. People couldn't find it anywhere for holiday baking.
Right. To keep up with that unprecedented surging demand, Kraft Heinz leaned heavily into producing the tub spreads. Why? Because the tub spreads, with their drastically lower cream requirements and a heavy reliance on water and fast-acting gums, are significantly faster and cheaper to manufacture at a massive industrial scale than the traditional, slowly fermented block.
That makes sense.
The supply crisis essentially pushed millions of consumers toward the highly stabilized tub product, and a huge percentage of them just never switched back to the real thing.
Which is a tragedy, because if you just reach a little further down that exact same grocery store shelf and grab the original silver foil-wrapped Philadelphia block, you are getting an entirely different product. This is the good side of the paradox.
Yeah. It truly is night and day in terms of formulation. The ingredient list on the classic foil brick is surprisingly clean. It's pasteurized milk and cream, salt, carabine gum, and cheese culture.
Now, wait. It does contain one gum, the carabine gum, so it's not a perfectly pure pre-industrial recipe.
That's true. It is not perfectly pure. However, compared to the aggressive cocktail of 3 or 4 different hydrocolloids in the tub spread, the block is vastly superior. That single gum acts as a minor structural stabilizer for transport, but the vast majority of the actual structural work inside that foil block is being done by real dairy fat and traditional bacterial fermentation.
Oh, yeah.
Within the dairy industry, the Philadelphia block is widely considered the acceptable backline for what commercial cream cheese should be.
And the people who actually use this stuff professionally refuse to use anything else. We looked at a Reddit thread dedicated entirely to the nuances of baking cheesecakes, and the consensus among the home bakers and professional pastry chefs was absolute. They swear by the foil block.
Yep.
One pastry chef specifically warned the thread against ever attempting to use the tub spreads for baking.
And there's a perfect physical reason for that warning.
Right. The chef noted that the second you put a mechanical stand mixer to the tub spread, the violent mechanical action literally shreds the artificial gum structure, and the whole thing collapses into a watery, runny puddle.
It is a perfect, real-world physical demonstration of the chemical illusion we've been unpacking this whole time.
It really is.
The gums can hold the water matrix together when it is sitting perfectly still in a plastic tub, but the moment you apply actual kinetic stress to the system, the illusion completely shatters because it inherently lacks the natural structural integrity of real fermented dairy fat.
That Reddit thread was also hilarious because everyone was trying to figure out why the Philadelphia block behaves so much better than generic blocks. People were joking that the secret ingredient must be water drawn straight from the Schuylkill River in Philly, or that the cream is churned with the essence of Gritty, the hockey mascot.
The essence of Gritty.
It just goes to show the massive, undeniable cultural footprint this brand has, even if its tub products are completely compromising that legacy.
If we connect this paradox to the bigger picture for the consumer, it teaches a vital lesson. You absolutely cannot trust a brand logo implicitly. You have to evaluate the specific product format. Under the exact same logo, the block is largely real, the tub is an engineered imitation.
Okay, so if you want to put your money where your mouth is, if you want to escape the $4.98 fake out entirely, and you want to ensure you are actually feeding your family real, biologically fermented dairy, here's where you should look. Let's move to the good list.
This is where we highlight the brands that have deliberately chosen a more difficult path. They looked at the FDA loopholes, they saw the massive profit margins available by substituting free water for expensive cream, and they actively decided not to do it.
Thank goodness.
They chose to prioritize the biological integrity of the product over the absolute maximization of quarterly profit.
Let's start with a few honorable mentions for specific dietary needs or flavor preferences before we get to the absolute gold medal winners. First up, the sleeper hit of the dairy aisle, Prairie Farms.
Prairie Farms is a fantastic example of quiet, unpretentious quality. They are a farmer-owned cooperative that was founded way back in 1938, and they generally hide from the glitz and glamour of modern grocery marketing. You won't see sleek, minimalist packaging from them.
No.
But their cream cheese holds the historical record for the most wins at the World Dairy Expo.
And they do it without breaking the bank.
Exactly. It's clean, it's incredibly simple, relying primarily on high-quality cream sourced directly from their own cooperative cows, and remarkably, it usually retails for just around $2.29 a block.
That's amazing.
It proves definitively that you do not need a premium luxury price tag to deliver a clean, well-made product.
Next on the honorable mention list, we have Green Valley Creamery, which is the absolute savior if you are lactose intolerant. A lot of dairy brands try to make lactose-free products by stripping out the dairy entirely or replacing everything with weird starches and gums, but Green Valley took a genius, purely biological approach.
They did. Green Valley doesn't alter the traditional cream cheese foundation at all. They start with organic, pasteurized cream, sea salt, and live active cultures. They run a completely traditional fermentation process to build the rich structure naturally. The innovation is that they simply add the lactase enzyme to the finished product.
Explain how that enzyme works because it's brilliant.
Lactose is a complex sugar found in milk. People with lactose intolerance lack the enzyme lactase needed to break that complex sugar down into simpler sugars, which is what causes massive digestive distress. Green Valley just adds the lactase enzyme directly into the vat.
So smart.
The enzyme pre-digests the lactose sugars for you, breaking them down, but crucially, it does this without disturbing the structural integrity of the cheese curds.
And it's also low FODMP certified, making it incredibly safe for people with serious chronic digestive issues like IBS. Plus, from a culinary standpoint, there's a fascinating side effect. Breaking down the complex lactose into simple sugars actually naturally sweetens the cream, giving it a wonderfully rich, slightly sweet flavor profile without adding any actual sugar.
It's a perfect example of using biology to solve a problem instead of industrial chemistry.
And our last honorable mention is Nancy's Organic Probiotic Cream Cheese. Now, this one is the polarizing outlier of the entire deep dive. The sources we reviewed were completely aggressively divided on it.
Oh, very divided.
Food Fraud Watch absolutely despised it. They called it a culinary horror show, claiming it tastes like caulk mixed with spoiled cheese. They hated the texture. But the investigation from Grocery Exposed praised it incredibly highly for its biological integrity, noting that they use extended fermentation times to build density without relying on any gums whatsoever.
It is a product designed for a very specific, health-conscious consumer. Nancy's prioritizes probiotics above all other sensory metrics. To achieve that, they use 4 different robust strains of live active cultures.
And more cultures mean more lactic acid.
Exactly, which results in a wildly tangy, highly acidic, almost aggressive flavor profile. The taste testers at the kitchen compared it to a very thick, very sour yogurt rather than traditional cream cheese.
Yes, yeah.
However, they also praised it for being incredibly healthy, noting that it has 0 added stabilizers and is exceptionally low in sodium clocking in at just 40 milligrams per serving, compared to the 100+ milligrams you find in almost every conventional brand. If you want maximum gut health benefits, you want to avoid gums, and you don't mind a sharp, yogurt-like tang on your bagel, it is a scientifically excellent, uncompromised product.
Right. Those are the honorable mentions for specific needs. But if we're looking for the absolute best, the ultimate brands that deliver on the promise of rich, real, traditional cream cheese without the chemical scaffolding, there are 2 brands that stand entirely above the rest of the market.
The winners.
The first is Organic Valley.
Organic Valley is arguably the most important brand on this list simply because of its wide national availability and its uncompromising ethical standards. Their block usually retails for around $5.29 for 8 ounces.
Okay.
That is undoubtedly a premium price, but in this specific case, you are paying for actual verifiable agricultural quality, not just a fancy label or store aesthetic.
And that quality stems directly from how the company itself is structured.
Exactly. Organic Valley isn't a faceless corporate conglomerate answering to Wall Street shareholders who demand quarterly margin increases. It is a cooperative made up of over 1,800 independent family farms. The farmers themselves are the shareholders.
That changes everything.
It fundamentally changes the entire incentive structure of the business. They aren't looking for ways to substitute cheap industrial whey powders or water for milk because their entire business model is based on successfully selling the high-quality milk their own farms produce.
And their milk sourcing is audited at the farm level, ensuring the cows are actually pasture-raised, which, as we know, biologically impacts the flavor of the final product. Grass-fed cows produce milk with a different lipid profile. It's richer, it's more nutrient-dense, and it possesses natural, complex, buttery flavors that you simply cannot replicate in a lab with artificial flavoring.
You really can't.
And their ingredient list reflects that purity. Organic milk, organic cream, salt, and cultures. 0 gums. 0 thickeners.
Yeah.
Just biology doing its job.
And that brings us to the ultimate winner of this entire deep dive. The brand that proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the entire dairy industry's reliance on chemical stabilizers is a cynical choice, not a manufacturing necessity.
Tillamook.
Tillamook.
Tillamook is the absolute champion here. There's another cooperative, this one founded way back in 1909 out in Oregon. Their classic brick cream cheese contains exactly 3 ingredients: cultured pasteurized milk and cream, pasteurized skim milk, and sea salt. That is it. 0 gums, 0 whey protein concentrates, 0 industrial scaffolding of any kind.
Large multinational food conglomerates have argued for decades that achieving massive commercial scale and consistent shelf stability without using hydrocolloids is either physically impossible or at least economically unviable.
Right.
Tillamook completely, utterly dismantles that argument. They operate at a massive national scale, yet they rely solely on incredibly high-quality dairy and meticulous, closely monitored traditional fermentation to build a texture that is naturally firm, incredibly rich, and melts beautifully when applied to heat.
And here's the most incredible part: the massive achievement that cemented them at the #1 spot in our research. Remember how we spent the first half of this deep dive explaining how spreads are the legal loophole the industry uses to pump products full of water and seaweed gums?
Yes.
Well, Tillamook decided to enter the spread market too. They wanted to make flavored, easily spreadable tubs, but they completely refused to use the loophole.
They did it the hard way.
They did. And at the 2025 International Cheese and Dairy Awards, Tillamook won 3 separate gold medals. They won Best USA Cheese for their very veggie spread and their jalapeno honey spread. And they won Best Cheese Spread overall for their original farm-style spread.
Incredible.
And they achieved all of this critical acclaim without using a single industrial gum or texturizer. They proved to the entire industry that you can make a highly spreadable, deliciously flavored cream cheese using only real dairy and real ingredients.
It is a profound culinary achievement because it strips away the industry's primary defense mechanism. When a massive conglomerate claims they have to use carrageenan and guar gum to make a spreadable product that consumers will enjoy, you can simply point to Tillamook's gold medals and know with certainty that the conglomerate isn't telling the truth.
Right.
They don't have to use those chemicals, they are just choosing the cheaper, more profitable, and potentially less healthy path.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means you have the power to stop being tricked. Your wallet and your gut microbiome are casting a vote every single time you walk down the dairy aisle.
Every single time.
The ultimate defense for you as a consumer is incredibly simple. Always look for the word spread on the front of the package. If you see that word, your guard should instantly go up. And actively scan the back ingredient panel for those red flag texturizers like carrageenan, guar gum, locust bean, or modified food starch. If you flip a tub over and see a paragraph of chemistry instead of 3 or 4 simple, recognizable ingredients, just put it back on the shelf.
Because knowledge is really only valuable when it is applied to your daily life. And unpacking all of this today raises a much larger and perhaps far more important question for you to consider long after this deep dive is over.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
If the massive global food industry has spent decades perfectly mastering the chemistry of making a cheap suspension of tap water and seaweed extract feel exactly like rich, luxurious dairy fat on your tongue, what other foundational everyday foods sitting in your refrigerator right now are just carefully engineered water balloons in disguise?
That is an unsettling thought to leave on. I mean, maybe that premium mayonnaise or that sour cream or that expensive salad dressing isn't what you think it is either.
Probably not.
Next time you spread that cream cheese on your toasted morning bagel, just make sure you know exactly what is melting into the bread. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.